I was editing photos in my cramped London studio flat when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. The flat was so small that my tripod doubled as a coat rack, and the kitchenette was close enough to my desk that I could make tea without standing up. Bills were piled on the corner of my workspace, most of them overdue, reminders of just how close I was skating to the edge every single month. Mr. Pembroke. The voice on the other end was formal, measured, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who wore tailored suits and never worried about grocery money. This is Ambrose Hartwell. I'm calling regarding your late mother's estate. We need to discuss the contents of her final will. My breath caught in my throat. The cursor on my computer screen blinked in the silence that followed. Mum had been gone barely 3 weeks. Cordelia Pembroke, quiet, gentle, always apologizing for taking up space she never actually occupied, had spent her last years living modestly in a small cottage outside Surrey. She'd left my father Reginald long before she passed, but she'd never told me much about their divorce beyond saying it was necessary, darling. For you. Her death had gutted me. But this unexpected call from a barrister I'd never heard of, felt like a loose thread being pulled from a fabric I didn't know existed. I wasn't aware my mother had a personal barrister, I said carefully, setting down my coffee mug. She lived very simply. I assumed there wasn't much to handle. Mr. Pembroke, Hartwell said, his tone shifting slightly, becoming more gentle. Your mother was far wealthier than anyone knew. I think it's best we discuss this in person. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? I agreed, though my mind was spinning. Wealthier than anyone knew? My mother had worked as an accountant her entire life, pulling in maybe £40,000 a year. She drove an old Vauxhall, shopped at charity stores, and never took holidays. What wealth could she possibly have accumulated? That night I barely slept. I kept replaying memories of her, the way she'd smile softly when I showed her my photographs, the way she'd slip me a 20-pound note when I was struggling, whispering, "Don't tell your father." There was always something sad in her eyes, something I'd never been able to name. Hartwell's office overlooked the Thames, all glass walls and polished steel, the kind of place that screamed money and power. I sat in my best shirt, which still smelled faintly of the darkroom chemicals from the night before, feeling entirely out of place among the leather chairs and modern art. Your mother left you everything, Hartwell said, sliding a thick folder across the mahogany table. I nodded, expecting something small. The cottage, maybe. A few £1,000s in savings. His next words shattered that assumption entirely. £15 million. I actually laughed. The sound came out sharp and disbelieving, echoing in the pristine office. Then I stopped when Hartwell opened the folder, showing me bank statements, offshore investment accounts, property deeds in 3 different countries, all legally transferred into my name. What? How? My voice came out as a whisper. My mother was an accountant making $40,000 a year. She lived in a cottage that probably cost less than this office furniture. How could she possibly have £15 million? She invested exceptionally well, Hartwell said, his expression neutral, but his eyes kind. Over the course of 20 years, she built a portfolio that most professional fund managers would envy. But more importantly, Mr. Pembroke, she hid it. For a very specific reason. He handed me a sealed envelope, addressed in my mother's looping handwriting. My hands shook as I took it. There's also a second folder, Hartwell continued, producing another thick envelope, this one sealed with red wax. Your mother's instructions were explicit. You are to read her letter first, in private, then decide what to do with the contents of the second folder. She trusted you completely with this decision. I left his office in a daze, clutching both envelopes like they might disappear if I loosened my grip. On the tube ride home, I stared at my mother's handwriting, tracing the curves of my name with my thumb. What had she been hiding? And why had she lived like she had nothing when she'd been sitting on a fortune? Back in my flat, I sat on my worn sofa and opened the first envelope with trembling fingers. My darling Alistair, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means I've gone and left you to face the truth alone. I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner, but I feared Reginald and Percival far too much. My chest tightened at the mention of my father and brother. In the second folder, you will find evidence. Years and years of evidence. Your father and brother have committed serious crimes, fraud, tax evasion, money laundering on a scale that would shock you. I discovered it all during my years working as the company accountant. I stayed silent to protect you, to keep you safe from their retaliation. But now that I'm gone, the choice falls to you. You must decide what to do with this information. I won't tell you which path to take, but I will say this. Choose justice, even if it destroys what's left of our family. Choose truth, even when it's painful. I built this money for you so you would never be dependent on them, never be trapped the way I was. I love you more than words can express. You were always the light in my darkest days. With all my love, Mum. Tears blurred my vision as I set the letter down. My hands shook as I broke the wax seal on the second folder and opened it. Inside were hundreds of pages, bank statements showing wire transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, forged contracts with the government, inflating costs and skimming millions off the top, email chains between my father, Reginald Pembroke, owner of Pembroke Industrial Solutions, and my brother Percival, the vice president and heir apparent, discussing how to hide money, how to bribe officials, how to manipulate tax filings. The scale was staggering. 8 million pounds in evaded taxes, 12 million laundered through shell companies. Bribes totaling hundreds of thousands paid to local officials and inspectors. My mother had documented everything. Dates, amounts, names, account numbers. She'd even included a notarized statement, written 6 months before her death, explaining exactly how she'd discovered the crimes and why she'd stayed silent. I sat there for hours, flipping through page after page, my stomach churning. My father, the man who'd always looked at me with vague disappointment, who'd called my photography career a waste of potential, was a criminal. And my brother Percival, who'd spent our entire childhood reminding me I'd never measure up, was right there beside him, knee-deep in fraud. The anger that rose in me was hot and sharp. They dismissed me my whole life, treated me like I was less than, like I didn't matter, and all the while they'd been stealing, lying, breaking the law without consequence. But beneath the anger was something else. Grief. My mother had carried this burden alone for years, too afraid to speak, too terrified of what they might do if she exposed them. She'd lived like a pauper while secretly building a fortune, all to ensure I'd be free of them one day. I didn't turn the evidence in that night. I needed time to think, time to process. But the universe had other plans. The next evening, an invitation arrived in the mail, thick cream cardstock with gold lettering, inviting me to my father's retirement gala. After 40 years at the helm of Pembroke Industrial Solutions, Reginald Pembroke was stepping down. The event would be a grand celebration at London's most exclusive venue, with all of the city's elite in attendance. The invitation noted that there would be a special announcement regarding the transfer of leadership and assets. I hadn't spoken to my father in nearly 2 years. Our last conversation had ended with him telling me I was wasting my life, that I'd never accomplish anything meaningful with a camera. I'd walked out and hadn't looked back, but now holding my mother's evidence in this invitation, I felt something shift inside me. I needed to see them, needed to look my father and brother in the eye before I decided what to do with the truth my mother had left me. I decided to go. The gala was held at the Grand Ballroom in central London, a place so opulent it felt like stepping into another century. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting prismatic light across marble floors. Men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns mingled with champagne flutes, their laughter echoing off the walls. I wore my only decent suit, borrowed shoes that pinched my feet, and felt completely out of place the moment I walked through the doors. Eyes turned toward me immediately. Whispers followed. I caught fragments of conversations as I moved through the crowd. "Isn't that the son? The photographer? I heard he hasn't spoken to Reginald in years. What's he doing here?" I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, more to have something to do with my hands than because I wanted it. The evidence folder was back in my flat, but I could feel its weight in my mind, heavy and insistent. "Well, well?" A voice cut through the ambient noise, sharp and mocking. "Look who decided to show his face. I turned to find Percival standing there, tall and polished in a bespoke tuxedo, his dark hair slicked back, a smug smile playing at his lips. My older brother had always carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew he was destined for greatness. Standing beside him was his fiancée Diana, dripping in diamonds, looking at me like I was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. "Hello, Percy," I said evenly. "It's Percival," he corrected, his smile widening. "We're at a formal event, little brother. Try to keep up, though I suppose street photography doesn't require much in the way of etiquette." A few people nearby laughed. My face burned, but I kept my expression neutral. "I didn't realize you'd be attending," Diana added, her voice saccharine. "This is rather an event for serious business people. Not really your scene, is it?" "My father invited me," I said quietly, though I knew that wasn't entirely true. The invitation had been a formality, sent to the family address by an assistant who probably had no idea about our estrangement. "How generous of him," Percival said, taking a sip of his champagne, "given that you've spent the last few years pretending we don't exist. Tell me, Alistair, how is the photography business? Still scraping by? Still living in that glorified closet in Hackney?" Before I could respond, a hand clapped down on Percival's shoulder. My father, Reginald Pembroke, stood there in an immaculate tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled, his presence commanding immediate attention. At 68, he still looked every inch the titan of industry, the self-made man who'd built an empire from nothing. "Percival," he said, his voice carrying that authoritative tone I remembered from childhood, "stop antagonizing your brother. We have guests." His eyes flicked to me, cool and assessing. "Alistair, I didn't expect you to attend." "I thought I should be here," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "For family." Something flickered across my father's face, too quick to read. "How considerate. Well, do try not to embarrass us. This is an important night." He turned away before I could respond, Percival following like a loyal shadow. I stood there, champagne glass gripped too tightly in my hand, feeling 12 years old again, desperately seeking approval that would never come. The evening progressed with speeches and toasts. Business partners praised my father's vision and leadership. Percival basked in the attention, shaking hands and accepting congratulations as the crown prince about to inherit the kingdom. I stayed on the edges of the crowd, watching, the evidence folder burning in my mind like a guilty secret. Then the moment came that would change everything. My father took the stage, microphone in hand, the room falling silent in anticipation. Spotlights illuminated him, making him look almost mythic, larger than life. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice resonant and clear, "thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate this milestone. Pembroke Industrial Solutions has been my life's work, and seeing it thrive gives me more satisfaction than I can express." Applause rippled through the crowd. I clapped mechanically, my mind elsewhere. "Tonight, I'm announcing my official retirement," my father continued, "and the transfer of complete control of the company to the next generation. But before I do, there's a personal matter I must address publicly." My stomach dropped. Something in his tone, in the way his eyes scanned the crowd and landed on me, sent ice through my veins. "There has been, for many years, a question about my family," he said, his expression grave. "About my sons, and I believe, for the sake of clarity and honesty, that question must be answered tonight." A massive screen descended behind him, glowing to life. My heart began to pound. "This young man," my father said, pointing directly at me, "Alistair Pembroke, is not my biological son." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. I felt 400 pairs of eyes turned toward me, felt the weight of their shock and curiosity crushing down like physical force. "He is the product of my late wife Cordelia's infidelity," my father continued, his voice steady, clinical, as if he were discussing quarterly earnings rather than destroying a person's life. "I have DNA evidence to prove it." The screen behind him displayed a paternity test result, blown up enormous for everyone to see. Patient A, Reginald Pembroke. Patient B, Alistair Pembroke. Probability of paternity, 0%. The words blurred as tears stung my eyes. I couldn't breathe. The room spun. I discovered this truth 6 months ago, my father said, and I've spent that time coming to terms with it. Tonight, as I transfer my life's work to the next generation, I want to be clear. My estate, my company, everything I've built will pass solely to my true biological son, Percival Pembroke. Percival stepped forward, joining our father on stage. He had the audacity to look sympathetic, shaking his head as if saddened by the revelation. But I saw the smirk at the corner of his mouth, the gleam of triumph in his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Percival said into the microphone, his voice dripping with false concern, "I know this is difficult for my brother, but the truth matters. And while I wish things were different, I'm honored to carry on my father's legacy." The crowd erupted in applause, some standing, celebrating the official coronation of Percival Pembroke as heir to a £200 million empire. I stood frozen, unable to move, unable to think. People were staring at me, some with pity, most with barely concealed fascination, watching me fall apart in real time like it was entertainment. A woman near me whispered to her companion, "Can you imagine finding out like this, in front of everyone?" "Well," her companion replied, "at least now we know why he never fit in." Their words felt like knives. I wanted to scream, to run, to disappear. Instead, I turned and walked toward the exit, each step mechanical, my vision tunneling. As I passed the stage, Percival's voice followed me, amplified by the microphone. "Should have stayed irrelevant, little brother." Laughter rippled through parts of the crowd. I kept walking, pushed through the ornate doors, and stepped out into the cold London night. The wind bit at my face, but I barely felt it. I walked for blocks, no destination in mind, just needing to move, needing to escape the humiliation that clung to me like smoke. Not his son. The words repeated in my mind, over and over. Everything I'd ever been, my entire identity, my name, wiped away in front of hundreds of people. My father had used his retirement celebration, the pinnacle of his career, to publicly disown me. I found myself at the Thames, leaning against the railing, staring at the dark water below. My phone buzzed incessantly in my pocket. I finally pulled it out and saw dozens of messages flooding in. Texts from old university friends. "Mate, just saw the video. Are you okay?" Messages from acquaintances I barely knew. "Is it true?" And then I saw it. The video. Someone had recorded the entire thing and posted it online. It was already going viral. 2 million views in 3 hours. The comments were brutal. "Imagine finding out you're not your dad's kid in front of the whole world. No wonder he ended up a failure. Bad genetics. That father is savage. Respect." I nearly threw my phone into the river. My hands shook with rage and grief and something darker, something that tasted like vengeance. I thought of my mother's letter. "Choose justice, even if it destroys what's left of our family." They had destroyed me first, publicly, cruelly, without mercy, and they'd done it while sitting on a throne built from lies and crimes. I pulled out my phone and searched for the number. My fingers trembled as I dialed. "Scotland Yard Economic Crimes Unit," a voice answered. "My name is Alistair Pembroke," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "and I need to report major financial crimes committed by Pembroke Industrial Solutions." The next morning, I sat across from Detective Barnaby Ashford in a windowless interview room that smelled of old coffee and tension. Ashford was in his mid-40s, with tired eyes and the demeanor of someone who'd seen every kind of human ugliness and wasn't surprised by any of it anymore. I'd brought everything, every document, every email, every piece of evidence my mother had collected. I spread it across the table like playing cards, watching Ashford's expression shift from professional interest to genuine shock. "Christ," he muttered, flipping through bank statements. "This is massive. Pembroke Industrial Solutions, that's one of the largest manufacturing companies in the UK." "I know," I said quietly. "My father built it, and he's been stealing from it, and from the government, for over a decade." Ashford looked up at me, his gaze sharp and assessing. "You understand what you're doing here? This will destroy your father's company. It will destroy your family." "He destroyed me first," I said, the words coming out harder than I intended. Last night, in front of 400 people, he's not my family anymore. I told him about the gala, about the public disownment, about the DNA test displayed for everyone to see. Ashford listened without interrupting, his expression carefully neutral. "This evidence," he said, tapping the folders, "where did it come from?" "My mother," I explained. "She worked as the company accountant for years. She discovered what they were doing and documented everything. She was too afraid to come forward while she was alive, but she left it all to me when she died 3 weeks ago." Ashford picked up my mother's notarized statement, reading it carefully. "Cordelia Pembroke. She writes here that she feared retaliation from both your father and brother if she exposed them." "My brother Percival is the vice president," I said. "He's been part of this the entire time. Every forged contract, every hidden account, he signed off on it." Ashford was quiet for a long moment, studying the evidence with the careful attention of someone who knew exactly how valuable it was. Finally, he looked up at me. "Mr. Pembroke, if everything here checks out, and I have no reason to believe it won't, we can arrest them within 48 hours. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed?" I thought of my mother, spending years in silence, too terrified to speak. I thought of her modest cottage, her secondhand clothes, the way she'd apologized for existing, and I thought of the 15 million pounds she'd hidden away, built from nothing, just to ensure I'd never be trapped the way she was. "I'm certain," I said. "Do it." I signed the formal complaint. Ashford assured me they would move quickly, that with evidence this solid, there would be no warning, no chance for my father and brother to hide assets or flee. I left the police station feeling strange, hollowed out and simultaneously filled with something I couldn't name. Not quite satisfaction, not quite relief. Just a sense of inevitability, like watching dominoes fall. The raid happened the next morning. I wasn't there to see it, but the news footage was everywhere by afternoon. Police in tactical gear entering Pembroke Industrial Solutions headquarters. My father and Percival being led out in handcuffs, surrounded by officers and cameras. The footage played on every news channel. Sky News ran it with the headline, "Manufacturing Titan Arrested in 50 million pound fraud scheme." The BBC showed my father's perp walk, his face pale and shocked, Percival beside him yelling at reporters, his usual composure shattered. I watched from my flat, my phone turned off, curtains drawn. The story exploded across every media platform within hours. Pembroke Industrial Solutions stock price crashed 87% in a single day. Partners issued statements distancing themselves from the company. 600 employees faced unemployment as operations ground to a halt. My phone, when I finally turned it back on, was flooded with messages. Reporters wanted interviews. Old family friends demanded to know what I'd done. Some messages were supportive, calling me brave. Others were vicious, calling me a traitor, a vindictive son destroying innocent people's livelihoods. One message stood out from a blocked number. "You destroyed my career. I have 3 kids. I hope you're happy, you bastard." Guilt twisted in my stomach. I hadn't thought about the employees, the regular people whose lives would be upended by this. They hadn't committed crimes. They were just trying to make a living. But then I remembered the scale of what my father and brother had done. 8 million in evaded taxes, money that should have gone to schools and hospitals. 12 million laundered, funding who knows what. They'd built their empire on theft and lies, and eventually empires built on lies collapse. I just accelerated the inevitable. The preliminary hearing happened within a week. I watched it on television, unable to stomach being there in person. My father and Percival stood before the judge, their expensive lawyers arguing for bail. The prosecution argued they were flight risks with resources to disappear. The judge set bail at 2 million pounds each. They paid it and walked out the same day, immediately issuing statements through their lawyers. My father called the charges baseless, a malicious attack orchestrated by a disturbed young man seeking revenge. Percival's lawyer painted me as someone motivated by greed, jealous of my brother's success, fabricating evidence to steal an inheritance I never deserved. The tabloids ate it up. Opinion pieces debated whether I was a whistleblower hero or a family destroyer. Some columnists praised my courage. Others called me the worst kind of traitor, the kind who betrays blood for money. The truth was, I felt neither heroic nor villainous. I felt tired, bone deep, soul tired. I moved to a new flat, somewhere anonymous where reporters couldn't camp outside my door. I threw myself into photography work, taking jobs I'd normally turn down just to keep my mind occupied. Wedding shoots, corporate headshots, anything that required me to focus on something other than the growing media circus. But isolation crept in. Friends stopped calling, either out of awkwardness or because they'd chosen sides and I wasn't on theirs. Dating was impossible. The few times I tried, women would recognize my name or Google me and the conversation would die. I was alone with my mother's 15 million pounds and the wreckage of my family name. The trial was set for 6 months out. 6 months of waiting, of watching the legal machinery slowly grind forward. 6 months of living in a strange limbo where I was simultaneously the most talked about person in London and completely alone. During those months, I received threatening phone calls. Some were from fired Pembroke employees, others from business partners who'd lost money. A few were from people who just enjoyed cruelty, strangers telling me I should have died instead of my mother, that I was a cancer on my family. I hired security after someone threw a brick through my window with a note attached, "Traitors deserve pain." The loneliness was crushing. There were nights I sat in my new flat, staring at my mother's letter, wondering if I'd made the right choice. She'd said to choose justice, but justice was cold comfort when you had no one to share your life with. I thought about the gala often, replaying the moment my father had pointed at me and declared I wasn't his son. The humiliation never faded. It lived in my chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. And beneath everything else was a question I couldn't shake. What if the DNA test was real? What if I really wasn't his son? Did that change anything? Did it make the crimes less real? Did it make my choice wrong? I had no answers, just more questions in the slow, grinding passage of time. When the trial finally began, the Old Bailey courtroom was packed. Press filled the gallery. Sketch artists captured every moment. My father and Percival sat at the defense table in expensive suits, their lawyers flanking them like armor. I took the witness stand on the third day, my palms sweating, my heart hammering against my ribs. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Helen Crawford, walked me through the evidence methodically. "Mr. Pembroke, can you explain how you came into possession of these documents?" "My mother left them to me when she died," I said, my voice echoing strangely in the formal space. She'd worked as the company accountant for 20 years. She documented everything because she knew it was wrong, but she was too afraid to come forward while she was alive. "And why do you believe she was afraid?" "Because my father and brother are powerful men," I said, looking directly at them. "Because speaking out would have destroyed her life, maybe even put her in danger." She stayed silent to protect herself and to protect me. The defense attorney, a silver-haired man named Whitfield, stood for cross-examination with the air of someone about to gut me. "Mr. Pembroke, isn't it true that you recently inherited 15 million pounds from your mother?" "Yes." "And isn't it also true that your father publicly stated you are not his biological son, which would exclude you from any inheritance from his estate?" My jaw tightened. "He made that statement, yes. So you had both motive and means to fabricate evidence against your father and brother. 15 million pounds is quite a fortune, but the Pembroke estate is worth nearly 200 million. Isn't this really about money? About revenge?" "No," I said firmly. "I had the 15 million before I turned in the evidence. I didn't need more money. I needed justice." "Justice," Whitfield repeated, his tone skeptical. "Or perhaps you simply wanted to hurt the family that rejected you?" The question hung in the air. I felt the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on me, waiting for my answer. "My mother carried this secret for years," I said slowly. "She suffered in silence because she was afraid. When she died, she left me a choice. I could bury the truth like she did, or I could bring it into the light. I chose light. Not because I wanted revenge, but because crimes like this don't just hurt one family. They hurt everyone. 8 million pounds in evaded taxes? That's money that should have gone to schools, hospitals, infrastructure. My father stole from every taxpayer in this country, and he did it while living like a king. Whitfield tried several more angles, suggesting the evidence was forged, that my mother had fabricated it, that I had manipulated documents. But the prosecution had forensic accountants who'd verified everything. The paper trail was ironclad. When it was Percival's lawyer's turn, she took a different approach. Mr. Pembroke, your father presented DNA evidence at his retirement gala, proving you are not his biological son. Do you dispute that evidence? I don't know, I admitted. I never saw the original test. I only saw what was on that screen. But you accept that you may not be Reginald Pembroke's biological son? I accept that he believes I'm not. And yet you expect this court to believe you have no ulterior motive in destroying his life? I met her eyes. I expect this court to look at the evidence. The crimes are real. The victims are real. Who my biological father is doesn't change that. The trial stretched on for weeks. Expert witnesses testified about the financial irregularities. Former employees gave statements about suspicious activities they'd witnessed. The paper trail my mother had built was devastating, showing a pattern of fraud going back over a decade. My father never took the stand. His lawyers advised against it. But Percival did, and he was calm, composed, arguing that he'd simply followed his father's instructions, that he hadn't known the full scope of what was happening. The jury didn't believe him. After 8 hours of deliberation, they returned with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. My father's face went pale, then red. He gripped the table in front of him like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Percival turned to his lawyer, speaking rapidly, gesturing, but his lawyer just shook her head. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge was an older woman with steel gray hair and an expression that suggested she'd heard every excuse and believed none of them. Reginald Pembroke, she said, her voice cutting through the hushed courtroom, you have been found guilty of fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering on a scale that can only be described as breathtaking. You stole from the public coffers. You betrayed the trust of your employees and partners. You built an empire on lies. She paused, letting the words settle. I hereby sentence you to 18 years in prison. My father made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. His lawyer put a hand on his arm, steadying him. Percival Pembroke, the judge continued, turning to my brother, you were complicit in these crimes. You signed fraudulent documents. You helped conceal illegal activities. Your sentence is 9 years. Percival stood frozen, his face white. Then something in him snapped. He spun toward me, his eyes wild. I hope you die alone, he screamed across the courtroom. I hope you spend every day of your miserable life knowing what you destroyed. You're nothing. You hear me? Nothing. Security moved to restrain him as he continued shouting. My father just sat there silent, staring at nothing. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just a hollow ache that seemed to go on forever. The media declared it a victory for justice. Some outlets called me a whistleblower hero, comparing me to corporate fraud exposers of the past. Others still painted me as the villain, the son who destroyed his family for money. The company assets were frozen, liquidated to pay restitution. 600 people lost their jobs. Suppliers went unpaid. The Pembroke Industrial Solutions empire that had taken 40 years to build dissolved in months. I used some of my inheritance to set up a fund for the displaced employees, offering severance packages and job placement assistance. It didn't erase what happened, but it was something. Mostly I just tried to disappear. I stopped taking interviews, stopped reading articles about the case. I focused on photography, on quiet work that didn't require me to think about courtrooms and prisons and broken families. 2 years passed in relative quiet. The media moved on to other scandals. My name faded from headlines. I built a simple life, small freelance jobs, long walks through London, evenings spent in dark rooms developing film. I met Genevieve at a gallery showing of my work. She was standing in front of one of my photographs, a black and white image of the Thames at dawn, studying it with an intensity that made me curious. It's beautiful, she said when she noticed me watching. Lonely, but beautiful. We talked for hours that night. She was a teacher, patient and kind, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to see right through the walls I'd built. She knew who I was. She'd seen the news, but she didn't treat me like a scandal or a cautionary tale. She treated me like a person. We dated slowly, carefully. I was terrified of letting anyone close, of trusting again. But Genevieve was steady, present, genuine in a way I'd forgotten people could be. A year after we met, she moved into my flat. 6 months after that, we were married in a small ceremony with just a handful of friends. No family, no press. Just two people choosing each other. When Genevieve told me she was pregnant, I cried. Not from fear, though there was fear, but from something else, something like hope. The idea that I could build a family, a real family based on love and honesty, rather than power and lies, felt like a second chance I didn't deserve, but desperately wanted. Our son Nathaniel was born on a rainy Tuesday morning in March. When the nurse placed him in my arms, tiny and pink and squalling, something in my chest cracked open. I looked at his face, so impossibly small, so vulnerable, and made a silent promise. I would never make him feel the way my father made me feel. I would never pit him against a sibling. I would never value power over his well-being. I would break the cycle. Life became ordinary in the best possible way. Mornings with Nathaniel, watching him discover the world. Afternoons in my studio, teaching weekend photography workshops. Evenings with Genevieve, cooking dinner together, talking about nothing and everything. We bought a small house outside London with a garden where Nathaniel could play. I set up a darkroom in the garage. Genevieve planted vegetables that never quite grew right, but we ate them anyway. I used my mother's inheritance carefully. Most of it went into trust funds and investments for Nathaniel's future. But I also set up a scholarship fund for young artists from difficult backgrounds, kids who wanted to pursue creative careers but didn't have family support. It was small, maybe 4 or 5 scholarships a year, but it mattered. Every recipient got a letter explaining that the fund was created in memory of Cordelia Pembroke, a woman who believed in truth and second chances. I never publicized it, never put my name on it. It was just something I did, a quiet way of honoring my mother's legacy. 2.5 years after the trial, I received a phone call that shattered the fragile peace I'd built. "Mr. Pembroke?" The voice was professional, clinical. "This is Dr. Sharma from the Royal Marsden Hospital. I'm calling about your father, Reginald Pembroke." My stomach dropped. I hadn't spoken to my father since the trial, hadn't visited him in prison. We existed in separate worlds now, and I'd made peace with that. "What about him?" I asked carefully. "He's been diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia. It's quite advanced. He's been transferred from prison to our oncology unit for treatment." I waited, saying nothing. "The situation is critical," Dr. Sharma continued. "His only real chance of survival is a bone marrow transplant. We've searched the donor registry, but haven't found a suitable match. In cases like this, the best chance typically comes from close family members." "He has a son," I said flatly. "Percival." "We've tested Mr. Percival Pembroke," Dr. Sharma said. "Unfortunately, he's not a genetic match. The compatibility markers don't align sufficiently for a safe transplant." I stood there in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what she was saying. Percival wasn't a match. Percival, the golden son, the heir, the one who shared my father's blood according to that DNA test. "I don't understand," I said slowly. "I'm not his biological son. That was established. There was a DNA test." Dr. Sharma was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Pembroke, I realize this is complicated given your family history, but in situations this critical, we test all potential donors, regardless of previous paternity disputes. Would you be willing to come in for HLA typing? It's a simple blood test. Even if the probability is low, we need to explore every option." I should have said no, should have hung up and gone back to my life, to Genevieve and Nathaniel and the peace I'd worked so hard to build. Instead, I heard myself say, "I'll come in tomorrow." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to Genevieve, listening to her breathe, trying to understand why I'd agreed. My father had destroyed me, publicly humiliated me, declared I wasn't his son in front of hundreds of people. Why would I help him now? But beneath the anger and hurt, there was something else. Curiosity, maybe. Or the need for closure. I didn't know. The hospital appointment was brief. A nurse drew blood, labeled the vials, and told me they'd have results within a few days. I left feeling unsettled, like I'd opened a door I should have kept closed. 3 days later, Dr. Sharma called again. "Mr. Pembroke, we have your results." And? I kept my voice neutral, braced for confirmation that I was indeed not related, that this had all been a pointless exercise. "You're a perfect match," she said. 99.8% compatibility. Your HLA markers align almost perfectly with your father's." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. "That's not possible. The DNA test—" "I've reviewed the documentation from that test," Dr. Sharma interrupted gently. "Mr. Pembroke, I can't speak to the validity of previous paternity testing. What I can tell you is that HLA typing is extremely accurate for determining biological relationships, especially parent-child relationships. The markers don't lie. You are Reginald Pembroke's biological son." The world tilted. I sat down hard on the nearest chair, my vision swimming. "The DNA test was fake," I whispered. "I can't confirm that," Dr. Sharma said carefully, "but I can confirm that you are a genetic match for transplant, which strongly suggests a biological relationship." After she hung up, I sat there for a long time, phone in hand, trying to process what this meant. The DNA test at the gala had been a lie. My father had used forged evidence to publicly disown me, to strip me of my identity, to justify giving everything to Percival. But why? And who had faked it? The answer, when it came, was obvious. Percival. I drove to the prison where Percival was serving his sentence, a medium security facility about an hour outside London. The visiting room was depressing, gray walls and fluorescent lights, the air heavy with disinfectant and despair. Percival looked different. Prison had stripped away his polish, his confidence. He'd lost weight, his expensive suits replaced by a gray prison uniform, his hair cut short and uneven. When he sat down across from me, separated by a plexiglass barrier, his eyes were wary. We picked up the phones that allowed us to talk. "Alistair," he said, his voice hoarse, "I didn't expect to see you." "I need to ask you something," I said, keeping my tone level. "The DNA test, the one at the gala. You faked it, didn't you?" Percival's face went pale. He looked down, wouldn't meet my eyes. "Didn't you?" I pressed. After a long silence, he nodded. "Yes." The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd known it was coming. "Why?" Percival's hands shook as he set down the phone and rubbed his face. When he picked it back up, his eyes were red. "Because I was terrified," he said, his voice breaking. "My whole life, you were better. At everything. School, relationships, even the things that shouldn't matter. People liked you. They respected you, even when you had nothing. And I had everything. The job, the money, the position, but it was never enough. Father always compared me to you, always found me lacking, even when he pretended otherwise." "That's not true," I started, but he cut me off. "It is true," he insisted. "You don't know what it was like, being the heir to all that pressure while watching you just exist freely. You chose photography. You walked away from the company, from the money, from all of it. And Father respected that, even if he never said it. He respected your independence. Me, I was just a tool, an extension of his ambition. So you faked a DNA test to get rid of me?" "I paid a private lab £20,000 to alter the samples," Percival admitted. "I switched yours with someone else's, someone from their database who had no genetic relationship to Father. Then I presented the results to him, told him I'd had suspicions about you for years, that I'd done the test for his own peace of mind." "And he believed you?" "He wanted to believe me," Percival said bitterly, "because it made everything simpler. If you weren't his son, he didn't have to feel guilty about favoring me. He could justify giving me everything without feeling like he was failing you. I gave him an excuse, and he took it." The betrayal was staggering. Not just that Percival had lied, but that my father had accepted the lie so easily because it confirmed what he already wanted to believe. "You destroyed my life," I said quietly. "I know." Percival's voice was barely a whisper. "I destroyed everything. Your life, my life, Father's life. For what? For a company that doesn't even exist anymore? For money I'll never see? For approval from a man who's dying alone in a hospital? Tears ran down his face. He made no effort to wipe them away. I'm sorry, Alistair. I know that doesn't change anything. I know sorry doesn't give you back what I took. But I am. I'm so, so sorry. I sat there holding the phone, looking at my brother through the plexiglass barrier. He looked broken, hollowed out, nothing like the confident man who'd mocked me at the gala. We'd both been victims of our father's toxicity in different ways. Percival had been crushed under the weight of expectations. I'd been crushed by rejection. We'd turned on each other instead of recognizing the real problem. Father's dying, I said finally. Leukemia. He needs a bone marrow transplant. Percival wiped his eyes. I know, they tested me. I'm not compatible. I am. His eyes widened. You're going to save him? After everything? I don't know yet, I admitted. I came here first. Needed to understand the truth before I decided. He doesn't deserve your help, Percival said. He never treated you right, never valued you. Even without the fake test, even before any of this, he dismissed you your entire life. I know. So why would you even consider it? I thought about that question. Why would I? My father had hurt me, used me, discarded me. Saving him wouldn't undo any of that. It wouldn't give me back my childhood, my sense of belonging, the years of wondering why I wasn't good enough. Because, I said slowly, I don't want to be the kind of person who lets someone die out of spite. I don't want to become what he was. Percival nodded slowly. That's the difference between you and us. You're actually good. Father and I, we were always just pretending. I stood up, preparing to leave. Percival stopped me with one last question. Alistair, if you do this, if you save him, will you ever forgive us? I met his eyes through the barrier. I don't know. Maybe someday. But not today. I left the prison and drove straight to the hospital. The oncology ward was quiet, hushed, the air heavy with the weight of illness and hope. A nurse led me to my father's room in the intensive care unit, warning me that he was very weak, that I shouldn't stay long. I stood outside the door for a full minute, gathering courage. When I finally entered, I barely recognized him. Reginald Pembroke, the titan of industry, the man who'd commanded boardrooms and built an empire, was barely a shadow. He lay in the hospital bed, thin and gray, his skin papery, his breathing assisted by tubes and machines. The man who'd once seemed larger than life now looked small, fragile, human in a way I'd never seen. His eyes opened when I approached. For a moment, there was confusion, then recognition, then something that might have been shame. Why are you here? He rasped, his voice weak. Because I'm your son, I said, pulling a chair close to the bed, whether you believed it or not. Tears welled in his eyes. He tried to reach for my hand but lacked the strength. I took his hand instead, feeling how thin and cold it was. I was wrong, he whispered. So wrong about everything. The test, it was fake, wasn't it? Percival lied to me. Yes. I wanted to believe him, my father said, tears now running freely down his gaunt cheeks. Because it was easier. Easier than admitting I'd failed you. Easier than acknowledging that I'd built everything on sand and lies. I gave everything to the wrong son. Destroyed the right one. You destroyed both your sons, I said, just in different ways. I'm dying, he said. And I'll die knowing I wasted my life building something worthless. The company's gone. Percival's in prison. You hate me. I have nothing. You have a choice, I said. The doctors say I'm a perfect match for a transplant. I can save you. Hope flickered in his eyes, desperate and painful to see. You would do that? After everything? I haven't decided yet, I admitted. I came here to look at you first, to see if there was anything worth saving. And? His voice was barely audible. I was quiet for a long moment, searching his face, searching my own heart for the answer. I'm not doing this for you, I said finally. I'm doing it because I have a son now, Nathaniel. He's 2 years old, and I need to be able to tell him, when he's older, that I chose to be better than the cruelty that was shown to me. That when I had the power to save a life, even a life that had hurt me, I chose mercy. My father sobbed. I don't deserve your mercy. No, I agreed. You don't, but I deserve peace. And I can't have peace if I let you die out of revenge. I stood preparing to leave. I'll sign the consent forms. We'll schedule the transplant. But after this, we're done. I won't visit. I won't write. You'll live, but you'll live with the consequences of your choices, just like I've had to live with mine. Alistair, he called as I reached the door. I turned back. Thank you, he whispered. And I'm sorry for everything. I'm so, so sorry. I nodded once and left. The transplant happened 3 weeks later. The procedure was long, uncomfortable, but ultimately successful. They harvested bone marrow from my pelvis, a process that left me sore and exhausted for days. But the cells took in my father's body. His immune system began to recover. Within weeks, he was stable enough to be transferred back to prison to serve out the remainder of his sentence. I never visited him during his recovery. True to my word, I maintained no contact. I'd given him life, but I wouldn't give him my presence, my forgiveness, or my time. Those were for the family I'd chosen. For Genevieve, who'd stood by me through all of this. For Nathaniel, who would grow up knowing love without conditions. For the life I was building, brick by brick, from the ruins of the old one. 2 years passed. My father survived his prison sentence. I heard through distant channels that he'd been released on medical grounds, that he was living somewhere quiet, alone. I felt neither satisfaction nor sympathy at the news, just a distant acknowledgement that he was alive because I'd chosen to let him be. Percival was still in prison, with several years left on his sentence. I'd received one letter from him years ago, apologizing again. I'd read it once and filed it away. I didn't write back. Some bridges once burned stay ash. Life moved forward in gentle ways. Nathaniel started preschool. Genevieve got promoted to head teacher at her school. My photography work flourished, not because it made me rich, but because it made me happy. I used my mother's money to expand the scholarship fund, helping more young artists pursue their dreams without family support. Each year, I attended a small ceremony where the recipients received their awards. I never gave speeches, never sought recognition. I just handed them their checks and told them someone believed in them. One autumn afternoon, I took Nathaniel to my mother's grave. He was 4 now, old enough to understand in his own way. We stood in front of the simple headstone. Cordelia Pembroke, it read, Beloved Mother. Is this Grandma? Nathaniel asked, holding my hand. Yes, I said. You never got to meet her, but she would have loved you very much. Why is she here? Because everyone comes here eventually, I said carefully. But the love they leave behind stays with us. Nathaniel thought about this seriously, the way children do when confronting big concepts. I love her too, he decided. I knelt down and pulled him into a hug, feeling tears sting my eyes. She would be so happy to hear that. We laid flowers on the grave, daisies like she used to keep in her cottage. I stood there for a long time, one hand holding Nathaniel's, the other resting on the cold stone. I kept your secret, I whispered to her. I told the truth, just like you asked. It broke everything, just like you warned. But from those broken pieces, I built something new, something honest, something good. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and rain. I hope you're proud of me, Mom. I hope you're at peace. Nathaniel tugged my hand. Can we go to the park now, Daddy? I smiled, wiping my eyes. Yes, buddy. Let's go to the park. As we walked back to the car, Nathaniel chattering about the swings he wanted to try, I felt something settle inside me. Not forgiveness, not quite, but acceptance, understanding. My mother had left me 15 million pounds and a dark secret that tore apart my family. But she'd also left me something more valuable, the courage to choose truth over comfort, justice over silence. That inheritance had cost me my father, my brother, my name, and my place in the world I'd known. But it had given me myself. I was no longer Alistair Pembroke, the disappointment son, the rejected heir, the man destroyed at his father's retirement gala. I was Alistair Pembroke, the father, the husband, the photographer, the man who'd chosen to break a cycle of lies and cruelty. I was whole, and as I buckled Nathaniel into his car seat, listening to him sing a nonsense song about dinosaurs, I realized something that had taken me years to understand. The truth had broken everything, but breaking was necessary. You can't rebuild on a rotten foundation. You have to tear it down completely and start from scratch. My life now was built on honesty, on chosen love, rather than obligated connection. On values I decided for myself, rather than ones imposed by family legacy. It was smaller than the life I might have had. No empire, no dynasty, no millions beyond what I needed. But it was mine. Completely, authentically mine. And that was worth more than any inheritance my father could have left me. As I drove home with Nathaniel in the back seat, the London skyline fading behind us, I thought about the lessons I'd learned. Lessons I would someday teach my son. That family isn't determined by blood alone, but by love and choice and presence. That silence in the face of wrong is never neutral. It's complicity. That revenge and justice are different things. Revenge is about making others hurt. Justice is about stopping the hurt from continuing. That mercy doesn't require forgiveness. You can choose to save someone without pretending they didn't hurt you. That you can honor your parents without repeating their mistakes. That wealth measured in money is hollow. Wealth measured in love and peace and integrity is real. That sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it costs you everything. My mother had understood all of this. She'd lived it, alone and afraid, documenting crimes while wearing secondhand clothes and living in a cottage, building a fortune she never spent just so her son could be free. She'd carried the weight of truth for years because she was terrified. But when she died, she'd given me the choice she couldn't make, and I'd chosen to speak. It had destroyed the Pembroke Empire. It had sent my father and brother to prison. It had made me infamous. It had cost me my identity, at least temporarily, but it had also set me free. And now, driving through the quiet streets toward home, toward Genevieve and dinner, and the ordinary evening rituals that made up a life, I felt something I'd never expected to feel. Gratitude. Gratitude to my mother for her courage, even if she could only show it after death. Gratitude for the truth, painful as it was. Gratitude for Nathaniel's existence, for the chance to be a father who builds up instead of tearing down. Gratitude for Genevieve's love, steady and unconditional. Gratitude even for the pain, because it had taught me who I wanted to be. As we pulled into our driveway, the house lights glowing warm against the darkening sky, Nathaniel said, "Daddy, I had fun today." "Me too, buddy," I replied, unbuckling him and lifting him out. "Me too." Inside, Genevieve had dinner waiting. We ate together at our small kitchen table, laughing at Nathaniel's stories about preschool, making plans for the weekend, living the unremarkable, beautiful life we'd built. Later, after Nathaniel was asleep, I sat in my darkroom developing film from a recent shoot. The red safe light cast everything in warm shadow. Chemical smells filled the air. I watched images slowly appear on paper, emerging from nothing, and thought about transformation. My life had been one long process of development, painful exposure to truth, submersion in consequences, slow emergence into clarity. I wasn't the same person who'd sat in that cramped flat 2.5 years ago, answering a phone call from a barrister I'd never met. That person had been lost, drifting, defined by rejection and the desperate need for approval from people who would never give it. The person I was now, still flawed, still carrying scars, but no longer defined by others, no longer waiting for permission to exist. I was enough, not because I'd won some battle or proven myself, just because I'd chosen to be honest, to be kind, to break cycles rather than perpetuate them. My mother's legacy wasn't the 15 million pounds. It was the example she'd set, imperfect as it was. She'd shown me that truth matters more than comfort, that protecting evil, even out of fear, only lets it grow, that sometimes love means making impossible choices. And she trusted me to carry that forward. I hung the finished prints to dry and returned upstairs. Genevieve was reading in bed, and she smiled when I entered. "Good day?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, climbing in beside her. "Really good day." She kissed my forehead and returned to her book. I lay there in the comfortable silence, listening to her breathe, thinking about nothing in particular. This was enough. This quiet moment, this chosen family, this honest life. My father was alive somewhere, facing the consequences of his choices. Percival was in prison, doing the same. The Pembroke Empire was gone, dissolved like it had never existed. And I was here, in a modest house with my wife and son, doing work I loved, helping others when I could, building something real from nothing. The truth had broken everything. And I had used those broken pieces to build something better, something honest, something whole, something mine. And that finally was peace.